Welcome to another edition of the Market Pathways podcast. I'm Steve Levin, Editor-in-Chief of Market Pathways, and today it's our pleasure to bring you a conversation on MedTech cybersecurity with Kevin Fu. Kevin is probably the leading expert in MedTech cybersecurity and truly one of the pioneers in this field, which has grown rapidly in the past decade. After all, it was only 10 years ago that FDA had its first staffers devoted to the issue of cybersecurity, and Kevin was a pioneer in this space, working in his lab at the University of Michigan, where he launched the Archimedes Center to focus on MedTech cybersecurity. And then Kevin became the first acting director for MedTech cybersecurity at FDA before returning to his post in Michigan, and more recently moved to Northeastern University in Boston, where his lab and the Archimedes Center currently reside. We're pleased to bring you this conversation with Kevin. We talk with him periodically to update us on what's going on in the cybersecurity field in MedTech, and today's conversation will focus on some recent federal legislation in the U.S., along with some guidance documents, and also what's happening on a global scale in terms of international cybersecurity measures. So we hope you enjoy this conversation.
Hey, I hope you can hear me. My voice isn't fully back yet from a little cold.
No, it's not a problem. Is now a convenient time for you to talk?
It's the only time.
Okay. Well, I appreciate that. And again, thanks for reconnecting. After we spoke for the previous article, and then it was great having you at our conference in San Francisco. This is obviously, cyber is just a topic of continuing interest, and it's great to be able to check in with you periodically and do the kind of follow-up pieces. So let me start by, first of all, welcoming you to the neighborhood, since I live in Concord, Massachusetts, so your move to Northeastern is great. And talk a little bit about why you made that move and kind of what's going to happen to the Archimedes Center, or will that continue?
Sure. So Northeastern is just an amazing school. When I toured Northeastern, I didn't realize just how great of a fit it is for the kinds of things I do and the kind of culture and values that are really important to me. In particular, their emphasis on interdisciplinary research and computing for everybody. It really melds well with the Archimedes vision for trustworthy medical devices, because most universities are very method-driven, but here at Northeastern, we're very mission-driven, and there's a real hunger to do better to help people. And Archimedes is actually a part of my laboratory, and I moved my laboratory, which includes Archimedes, to Northeastern.
Okay. Well, and of course, you had spent time at MIT, so you're back in your home base, right?
Oh, yeah, it is true. Boston's home to dozens of universities, including MIT, my alma mater. It's amazing how there's still quite a large contingent of my colleagues living in Boston.
Right. So let's talk a little bit about your time at FDA. Just kind of assess your time there. When we spoke last, you had taught, and this was right at the beginning of your tenure, you had talked about 5 goals that you had upon assuming that position, and particularly we talked about training and mentoring CDRH staff, and also post-market review of submissions. So assess kind of were you able to accomplish what you set out to accomplish, and where do you think things stand with the agency going forward?
Oh, well, I I really enjoyed working at FDA, and I would encourage other people to as well. The position I was in was acting director of medical device cybersecurity, and actually I continue working with FDA. I headed to an event with FDA today, actually.
Okay.
And I think, you just read the news, you can see all the outcomes of the great group of people there. We've got the draft final guidance that's going through its finalization process. We've got what became the omnibus bill that evolved from the original Patch Act. You can see a lot of language from the Patch Act matching what's inside the omnibus bill. We've got a great amount of work going on with IMDRF. Just today, they released a new document from the IMDRF.
Right.
That's led by Afton Ross at FDA. On the post-market side, you're seeing there's a great team at FDA that's been, pardon me as I'm just dodging traffic.
Okay.
Like I said, only time I have. I'm literally booked until June.
No problem.
But post-market, there's just an amazing team to handle vulnerabilities. But we voiced the alarm that there were no full-time people, no full-time, 100% dedicated staff to post-market issues with cybersecurity at FDA. And there was a looming crisis. If two vulnerabilities were discovered on the same day, it would have been unlikely that FDA could have had the personnel in place to handle that. And so it's really good to see in the omnibus bill a really much needed support of, now I'm dodging a bicycle in a highway, much needed support for hiring personnel for cybersecurity. I think those are some of the interesting points of late.
I want to touch a little bit more on both the draft guidance and the omnibus bill, but let me also raise concerns that I'm sure you've heard, which is, do you know what the agency's plans are as far as naming a successor? Because some people have got concerned that about how committed the FDA really is to cyber if they're not going to name a successor to you.
I'm certain FDA is going to name a successor. With the changes going on with the omnibus bill and the new funding, I think it's really important to let that all sink in the agency, because you hate to hire somebody right before there's major change like what the omnibus bill from Congress is mandating. So I suspect the FDA is trying to understand how is that position going to evolve. I'm certainly planning to be involved with encouraging others to apply to that position. It is a tough position. There aren't a whole lot of people who are qualified in this space who have industrial experience, have the credibility of original work, as well as that ability to work in the regulatory circles. But I do think these people exist, and I'm confident FDA will be posting a position. I don't speak for FDA, so I can't
Right.
say for sure, but I can just say in all my experiences, I believe FDA has all intentions to fill that position.
Right. So let's just touch briefly on both the draft guidance and the omnibus bill. And again, obviously, until these are final, they can obviously change. But can you touch on? Let's start with the draft guidance. The highlights, in other words, what do you think are some of the key points that? And again, I understand this is still a draft document, but what are some of the key points for industry to keep in mind that could emerge from this draft guidance?
Right. Well, like any fast-moving industry, there's always change. And cybersecurity is very closely related to the hockey stick growth of Silicon Valley. And so you see that in the draft guidance. And FDA, in their public comments, were quite clear that they expect things to change over time because the environment is changing, because the threats are changing. And so I think that philosophy is really a big part of that draft guidance. In particular, the first thing you'll notice is the title change more toward quality systems, so that much more system level thinking. You'll also see in that draft guidance that there's much more specific technical advice. In the very first pre-market guidance, which was around 2013, 2014, that was about 5 pages. It sort of listed things like, traceability matrices for understanding the cybersecurity risks, keep your systems up to date. This document encompasses a decade of feedback from the community and stakeholders, understanding best practices and the ways to have meaningful cybersecurity built in. So in particular, you're going to find inside there things like software bill of materials. You're going to find discussion of threat modeling. Those are 2 really big things inside that document. You also see a lot more discussion on the third-party software. So, for instance, the SBOMs that are requested in the draft guidance are not only about the software components, but it's about understanding the known vulnerabilities of each of those software components. And then if you look carefully in the draft guidance, FDA's document later states that if you choose not to include that kind of information in the SBOM, that's okay, but you should submit it separately for the review process, because that's an essential part of the risk management of these medical devices.
And what about the legislation, the omnibus bill? Are you pleased with what's in there? And again, what should industry keep an eye out for in that bill?
Yeah, I'm very pleased with the omnibus bill. I think it reflects something that a large number of stakeholders have been asking for years, including large parts of the industry, especially some of the leading medical device manufacturers asking for these kinds of provisions, because it's just common sense. If you're working in the medical device cybersecurity field like me, this is old news. All these ideas are things that we've been recommending for 10 or 20 years. So what's interesting is it's now part of federal law. That really speaks.
Kevin, can you give me a couple examples of what you're talking about?
I'm not quite sure. Examples of which part?
Examples that are in the omnibus bill that are examples of what you're talking about in terms of things that have been common. Things have been really for several years that industry has been looking for.
Things like patchability. So devices need to be patchable. I'm not the only one who's been saying this, but I definitely recall giving presentations at FDA in 2006 on these issues of patchability and software updates. One of my early publications was about how to do software updates properly on medical devices in 2007 or so. You talk to the health delivery organizations, they want things to be patchable. They don't want to see legacy unsupported operating systems like Windows XP or old versions of Windows in their clinical settings. Those simply are not securable. So that's one of the more obvious ones in my view. And you can find old documents from FDA, facts and fact sheets, for instance, where they spend a lot of time dispelling myths, because there are still people out there who misinterpret some of the regulations. They would say, a false assertion might be, we can't provide updates to our medical device software because of FDA rules. That's actually false. But now the law makes it quite explicit. It's expected, full stop.
Mm-hmm. FDA has denied 510K applications solely for cyber deficiencies. Has that, do you think, improved the quality of the cyber standards in terms of, has that kind of improved the quality of to show industry that the agency is serious about enforcing cyber issues?
I do think this has helped greatly. Compare today versus 20 years ago, the threat model and the active threats out there. 20 years ago, there were just a few people like myself, and we were talking more about hypothetical risks. We said, well, what if somebody could break into a medical device? Or, look, we can show you we can break into a medical device. Here's a college student over one weekend being able to break into a medical device, causing, significant risk if this were happening to a patient. Today, there are nation-state threats, and those are well-documented, things like ransomware, financially motivated, sophisticated adversaries. So I think it's extremely important that devices that aren't paying attention to the cybersecurity engineering in an adequate way, realize that, no, they actually do have to do their homework. So cybersecurity engineering, it's not easy, but it's necessary. It's been done. There are ways to manage the risk, but I can tell you there are, plenty of wrong ways to do it.
Everyone, I'm Joey Brenneman from Offscript Health, and we are excited to introduce you to Offscript Health's latest podcast series called Before We Die, the world's best podcast about the med tech industry. Every day, advances in technology are providing new, less invasive options in healthcare. Many of them are born out of the idea that there has to be a better way. On this show, we will be talking with the rock star innovators and inventors of the medtech industry who felt the same way, which inspired them to create a new device or challenge a way that a procedure was done. And most people don't even know who they are. So download and subscribe to Before We Die, wherever you get your podcasts. You'll get full episodes every Tuesday, and on Thursdays, you'll get our Lab Before Slab mini episodes where Sandy, John, and Craig geek out about the latest happenings in the medtech world. Who would have thought that medical innovation could be so riveting?
Hey, have you heard of Market Pathways? Market Pathways provides the most in-depth analysis you'll find of the changes happening in medical device regulation and reimbursement every day. They address the complexity in regulatory affairs and beyond by helping you digest and contextualize technical topics like Medicare and MDR. Visit mystrategist.com/trial today to start your free 5-day trial to Market Pathways. Again, that's mystrategist.com/trial for 5 days of online access.
So, if I were at FDA, if I had a magic wand, for instance, if a medical device manufacturer submitted a 510K that said, oh, you just have to put this on a secure hospital network, or, oh, you just have to put this behind the perimeter of a firewall, I would immediately reject that, saying that's such a fantasy. That's very quaint 1990s threat modeling. But I'm not at FDA, and I think what you'll see actually at FDA is a much more collaborative approach where a deficient manufacturer can be given some education on, being pointed to standards, being pointed to best practices if they make some of these, baby step mistakes. And in fact, you'll see in that public announcement from FDA just last month, where they talked about finalizing their immediate guidance to address the omnibus bill. They explain how they're giving this approximately 6-month period. Well, they'll be working with industry to help them with their deficiencies rather than immediately doing an RTA. But of course, they have made quite clear in their final guidance that after that October time period, that's when the learning period is shifting to no longer accepting and simply returning documents that don't meet those minimum basic documentation for cybersecurity.
Right. You mentioned threat models. One question that I got after our last article and after you spoke at our conference was people wondering whether have threat models changed in response to the current international situation. For example, top of mind was, of course, the situation in Ukraine with Russia, but also the challenges we've faced with China, Iran, even perhaps North Korea. How do you address the current state of threat models in terms of threats from nation states as opposed to kind of lone wolf hackers?
Yeah, well, the nice thing about a good threat model is that a good threat model will be agile. It's adaptable. I would say a less useful threat model is one that's sort of locked into a specific technology today. Talking about specific versions of software, that generally is not helpful because it's hard to evolve over time. So I think you'll find that if a manufacturer does a good job on their threat model, it will be able to adapt to these constantly shifting threats. And that's one of the main reasons why a lot of these steps are in place, because we all know that the threats today are not going to be the threats 10 years from now. What's ransomware 4.0? Nobody really knows. But we need to make the threat models adaptable to the expected lifetime of the device. So there's a huge difference if the device is going to be, incinerated, discarded, versus capital equipment that may be around for decades. Those devices that will be around for decades will have a more challenging time because they need to be more adaptable than the ones that are just for a moment in time.
Right. So, another area that we've talked about in the past is the need for total life cycle, taking a total life cycle approach, as opposed to, let's say, just focus on exclusively legacy or exclusively new devices. Talk about why a total life cycle approach is so critical, and I want to segue that into the IMDRF guidance that you mentioned.
Right. Well, I mean, in my view, if you're referring to the TPLC, the Total Product Lifecycle approach at FDA, in my view, that fits really well with the idea of outcomes, as opposed to just individual components. So the name of the game is primarily safety and effectiveness. And so that's the model that the industry has accepted. That's the model that the community has come up with collaboratively, the total product lifecycle approach. I don't know of a better way to do it. Of course, you need a healthy balance between systems thinking and component level thinking. And I think you'll find in the draft guidance and the omnibus bill examples of components that will be useful toward a total product lifecycle approach to protecting cybersecurity. And again, those examples like the SBOM and threat modeling, some of the issues of legacy devices and being more explicit about responsibility over time. Those are all things that through industry standards groups and stakeholder collaboration, that those particular approaches are well believed to help in protecting for that total product life cycle. The endpoint being that you retire it and the devices are no longer on the market.
And do you find that industry is receptive to a TPLC approach?
I do, but of course, saying like industry is saying like, oh, all kids or all adults do this.
Right.
You're going to find variation. I think that's normal, and I recognize that some manufacturers are frustrated because this is hard work. Nobody wakes up in the morning, I think, and says, I wish we had more security threats. Well, of course, we don't want to have these problems, but the fact is these problems exist. And so this is a very collaborative industry. You'll have manufacturers and regulators and vendors and patients and physicians working together and communicating to understand best ways forward. I've worked in other industries such as the payment card industry. And relative to that, I'm just really happy to see the different stakeholders speaking with each other and exchanging ideas frankly. And, when they have a disagreement, they voice that disagreement. But there are many ways, different approaches. But in the medical device community, the way forward is very consensus-driven. And so I think you'll find these, at least from the regulatory perspective, draft guidance and such, I find that those are all products of years of collaboration and working with stakeholders to consider different approaches and ideas for protecting the cybersecurity medical devices and ensuring safety and effectiveness.
That's a great segue into the last area I just want to touch on, which is international. And we alluded to the recent IMDRF guidance. It's hard enough to work within the U.S. on all the stakeholders that you mentioned and building a collaborative environment. Doing that on an international level, compounds the degree of difficulty, so to speak. Can you talk a little bit about the IMDRF guidance? I noticed they also heavily discuss SBOMs, which I think is a horrible acronym, but that's the acronym that everyone uses. But talk a little bit about that, the IMDRF guidance, and what does that mean for? Because again, we're talking about an international industry with medical devices. So, what does that mean, the IMDRF guidance, in terms of moving things forward on an international level?
Right. Well, let me just, especially for readers who might not be familiar with the IMDRF, so that's the International Medical Device Regulators Forum. So in my role at FDA, I participated in this group. You will typically find a couple dozen countries represented. You'll have representatives from the industry, major stakeholders representing the entire medical device industry involved in this group, as well as healthcare delivery organizations. So it's a body that looks to represent all the stakeholders of this group. Although they do not issue regulatory guidance in the sense of FDA issuing its guidance, what they do issue are what I would consider to be frameworks such that other countries can adopt language much more easily so that there's more consistency across borders. So nobody, I think, wants to make a product where they need 200 different versions for each country. And so I think what you'll find with the IMDRF is that it's going to bring more consistency to the process and providing that helpful template language as each country implements their models. And I think one of the reasons you're seeing countries adopting language that's very consistent and similar is because of the IMDRF. It's because that framework is there. Thank goodness, otherwise we might be having radically different approaches everywhere. So I'm really happy that the IMDRF can help bring more consistency to this regulatory process with these frameworks.
And can you just dig down a little bit and talk a little bit about the most recent guidance that the IMDRF issued? And it seemed to touch on a couple of the areas that we have been talking about, both SBOMs and TPLC approach.
So are you referring to legacy devices and SBOM?
Right.
Yeah. So maybe start with SBOM and then do legacy BOM. So software bill of materials is a complicated area. There's many different ways to do it. There are many different products out there. At a very high level, a software bill of materials is sort of like an ingredients list for what's on the inside of a system in terms of of the software. And from an FDA perspective, software includes things like firmware. This is really important because people receiving these medical devices or organizations like health delivery organizations, they would have a really hard time doing the risk management if they don't know what's on the inside. For instance, a really easy one would be, hey, does this run Windows XP? It's really helpful to know because that's not a secureable operating system. Or if a computer vulnerability comes out in a very generic software package like Log4j or OpenSSL, a very natural question is, hey, which medical devices in my hospital are affected? SBOMs over time are going to help make that much more methodical, able to look where you need to look rather than running around with your hair on fire. SBOMs, in the IMDRF document, you'll see other use cases mentioned. In the regulatory review process, SBOMs are really helpful for regulators and the reviewing teams to understand the risk of what's on the inside so that they can match that with the controls that the manufacturer has designed for any of those risks. So, for instance, if there's a component with a known vulnerability that has no fix, the manufacturer may propose some approach to mitigate those risks. Those are just a couple of the many use cases of SBOM. And the IMDRF document helps a lot with terminology, because if we have an inconsistent terminology, you're going to find, I think, a lot more confusion. We don't need more confusion. There's already enough confusion. And so having an IMDRF document as a framework for the language just on its own is already helpful so that when regulators, manufacturers, and HTOs are speaking, they can say, hey, when you say legacy, do you mean legacy in the sense of the IMDRF document? Which language are you speaking? And so I think that's going to be really helpful. Moving on to the legacy document, which was just recently published, there's a legacy device, in my view, is a device that is not only insecure, but is insecurable. It's simply technically infeasible to keep that device secure anymore. Maybe it's lived well beyond its design parameters, from the threat models of its early days to the threat model of today or tomorrow. That becomes a legacy device. And so the IMDRF document really helps to tease out different ways of shifting responsibility. So, for instance, at what point does a third-party software package shift from becoming a manufacturer's responsibility to maintain to keep secure versus shifting to a healthcare delivery organization? An extreme example might be two extremes would be there's a vulnerability in an operating system that is actively, then more than likely you would expect to see the manufacturer responsible for ensuring that patch gets delivered. But there will become a time at which, of course, predetermined, just like if you said, hey, this car is going to last 100,000 miles, you would expect to see some kind of language of that saying, after so much time, you would expect to have to retire this device because it's likely that the software will be no longer securable. And so that's when you would start to see shifting responsibility from manufacturers to healthcare delivery organizations. A key part, though, is being very explicit about this contractually, because nobody wants a surprise 10 years later saying, hey, we decided to make this your responsibility. So it's really important, and the document goes into some suggestions in this space about how to be more upfront between buyers and sellers, so providers and manufacturers, about this kind of shift in responsibility for legacy devices. But those are a few things that I've seen from IMDRF that I really appreciate, and again, brings more clarity and consistency globally for medical device security.
Well, Kevin, that's great. I want to be respectful of your time. Last question is, if companies want to reach out to you at Northeastern, what's the best way that they can contact you?
Yeah, well, you can find me at Northeastern, k.fu@northeastern.edu. Archimedes is resuming its training workshops September 20 and 21 in Boston. Suzanne Schwartz will be our keynote opening speaker on September 20, and we also have training on threat modeling and SBOM and some of the regulatory affairs aspects 2 days before on September the Monday and Tuesday before our event. So if you go to secure-medicine.org/events, you can find these events listed out, and we'll be posting that registration information later this summer.
Great. Well, Kevin, always great to connect with you, and I look forward to staying in touch, particularly now that you're in my backyard. So welcome back to Boston.
I appreciate it, and thanks to you for all the insightful questions. This is what I really like, the events you put on. I really like how it really gets to the material, and I can tell you spend a lot of time thinking about the questions, so I really appreciate the thoughtful questions.
Always good to talk to you, Kevin. Have a good day. We hope you enjoyed this conversation with Kevin Fu on MedTech Cybersecurity. To learn more about this topic, see the article that we did with Kevin in the May issue of Market Pathways. We look forward to bringing you the next edition of the Market Pathways podcast. And until then, thanks for listening.
We hope you enjoyed that episode. Your support is valuable and makes us better. Please remember to leave a review and rate Market Pathways on Apple Podcasts or wherever you happen to listen.